Greetings, ladies and laddies, and welcome back to the realms of this cursed city. In today's episode of our speed painting series, we're going to paint Watchcaptain Halgrim, the commander of the Ulfenwatch and one of the highest ranking officers in Radukar's court. When Radukar unleashed his minion upon Ulfenkar's citizens, Halgrim betrayed his oath as defender of the populace and gave his sword to Radukar. The remaining citizens were not overly happy about that, so they captured him and threw him in a pit filled with rats, where he found his cruel demise. But now, he is back in black, and even though that sounds quite cool, he looks rather boring, so we gotta change that. Ready your paints, pick up your brushes, and without further ado, let's get going. We start off with the armor, painting all of it in a dark blue tinted grey. Of course you could pick a dark true metallic metal if you'd like, but for me this shine would be too bright on this dark theme, which is why I opted for this cold, non-metallic metal approach. After all of the armor plate is painted, we move on to the tunic, painting it in a rich Bordeaux red. For his scale mail skirt, we use a rich brown for the base coat and after that a paler brown for the belt holding it in place. For Halgrim himself, or better for what's left of him, we take a dark beige to pick out all of his bones as well as the skull on his base. We've already got a lot of brown going on with this mini, so I think to keep it interesting we can take a rich mustard yellow for the shaft of his halberd. It is quite bright now, but don't worry, we will knock it down with wash later on. Okay, now it's our true metallic metals time to shine. Starting off with his weaponry, we'll take a dark silver and quickly paint the head of his halberd, as well as the dagger on his belt and the saber in his left hand. We can also use it to carefully pick out his belt buckle, before we switch it up to a dark bronze for the individual scales of his skirt, as well as the armored collar around his neck and the guard of his saber. Alright, now for something easy and fun. Because he is kind of aristocratic by his position as commander of the guard, I thought it would make much sense for him to have a cape of royal burgundy. Painting this is actually quite fun, until you reach the point where you have to twist your brush through him in order to reach the cloth behind his back. That's the difficult part, and honestly, I am really surprised that I somehow managed to not destroy my brush in the process. Anyway, I also painted the sheath of his dagger with it, before picking out a dark grey to paint his hair. For his eye patch, I originally used a pale brown, but after I saw that it had like no contrast to his skull, I switched it up for the same blue-grey of his armor. Even though it didn't work out for the eye patch, I think that we can use it very well for the roots on his base. For the ruined pillar under his feet, I chose to paint it in a bright grey to stand in clear contrast to the overall very dark Halgrim. This is how he looks so far, and I think we are really onto something here. So, the next step we're gonna take is to apply a heavy wash to fill in the recesses and overall knock down the paint's vibrancy. At this point, using too much is better than using not enough, so don't be hesitant with it. If you want to be a little more fancy and have the paint at hand, you may use a red wash for the tunic and the cape instead. If not, don't worry, a black wash will also do just fine. After the wash is fully dry, Halgrim has gotten a lot darker, more fitting his role as commander of an undead legion, and even though we could call the speed paint done at this point, I recommend taking out the paints we used for the base coat again and bring some of that saturation back. Now, we don't want to just paint the whole thing again, but just the areas where lots of light would hit. For example, on the armored collar, I used the bronze only to pick out the middle of the side that faces the sun directly, and left the other side alone. All of this is basically a means for some more subtle highlighting, to give the whole model more depth. If you find this effect too subtle though, you can of course choose slightly brighter colors or mix a drop or two of white into the base colors. You can see here how this could look like on the bones, for example. Just try to not get too bright when doing this. I had quite a lot of fun when doing this and would really recommend you to try it too, when you have a little more time to spend on your minis. Good! After all of the colors have been reinforced with fresh coats again, we turn our attention back to the base and give the stone pillar a quick light grey dry brush for some easy texturing and highlight. Then we take care of the ground itself, laying the foundation with Citadel's texture paint still and mud, which is basically a very thick paint with grains of sand mixed in. As soon as that's dry, we quickly dry brush 2 coats of lighter beiges over it, and finish the speed paint by painting the trim in a smooth pitch black. And there we go! Watchcaptain Halgrim, the commander of the Ulfenwatch, stands completely painted and battle ready. I had a whole lot of fun painting him, as he was actually not all that complicated as I first anticipated. And he got done so quickly as well! I reckon you can easily replicate this in just one evening of painting or a day on the weekend. Which really was a pleasant surprise. As per usual in this series, I will now use the next few minutes to show you guys a few optional and little more advanced steps to even further upgrade this already awesome looking mini. Okay, starting with the armor again, we take a brighter blue tinted grey and edge highlight the armor with it. When doing this, we just want to catch the most outward facing edges, hence the name edge highlighting, as well as the corroded trims of the holes and all of the little bolts dotted around the armor. This takes quite a bit of time and a steady hand, but I still recommend you give it a try, even if you don't feel that comfortable with it. After all this is done, we take an even brighter blue and repeat the whole process all over again. By this time you might think I've gone completely mad, to which I retort, yes, but that has nothing to do with it. We paint all of the edges just as before, but this time we try to be even finer with our brush strokes, leaving a bit of the first edge highlight still showing. Alright! Next we'll take a bright true metallic silver and edge highlight the armored color, and also pick out some of the bronze scales with it. We can also use this paint to brighten up the cutting edges of his weapons, and dab it lightly on the flat surfaces for a quick rough texture. Speaking about texture, I don't think Captain Halgrim as an undead warrior takes that good care of his equipment, which would have quickly built up rust over time. To quickly get a rusted effect, you just have to pick a brush that has already passed as best, and lightly dab ever paler getting browns onto the flat surfaces. To conclude the effect, you sprinkle some last drops of bright orange onto it, and you are left with quite a realistic looking rust effect. All of this should only take a few minutes worth of work, and I think it's one of the easiest weathering you can do, so definitely give it a try. Back from his metal gear, we finally come to the cloth. For highlighting his tunic, we can take a vibrant red, and after that stipple some orange onto the edges to make it look old and battle-worn. Now for highlighting the cape. First off, we start by just roughly picking out the big folds with a purple paint. After that's done, and all of the folds are sketched out, we take a bright pink paint and highlight all of the well-lit areas, meaning of course the top facing parts of the folds, as well as the upward facing edges of the cloth in general. We can also use this paint to quickly highlight the sheath of his dagger. If you want Halgrim's cape to look really fancy, you might want to consider painting some ornate embroidery on it. I went for a beige frame on the cloth, painting it in streaks on the flappy fringes, thinking about where it might have been when the cape was still whole. This is without a doubt one of the most difficult steps for this mini, so if you don't feel that comfortable doing it, just don't bother, as Halgrim will definitely look great even without it. Having the beige already on our brush, we can move on seamlessly to dotting some highlights onto Halgrim's skeleton, everywhere where the light hits the unobstructed bones the most. The last thing I did was to pick out that light grey again, to give the pillar some highlights onto its most prominent parts, before calling this paint job officially done. From his dark armor over his royal clothing to his rusty weapons, I'm really proud of how he turned out in the end, and also had lots of fun during the painting process, trying out the different techniques and really going overboard with the details on him. Even though many steps in the end took quite a long time on their own, it didn't feel boring, and I hope very much that you think so too. If you're following me along in this series with your own miniatures at home, you will have 39 of the 60 Cursed City miniatures finished by now. And as always, I'll have a guide listing the exact paints that I use for this paint job down in the description of the video. If you have any questions, maybe a couple of suggestions, please be my guest and share your thoughts in the comment section. Halgrim is a very imposing character on his own, but he is hardly a commander without having anyone to command. Which is why we're going to paint the skeletal warriors of the Ulfenwatch in the next episode. And if you would like to see their paint job, as well as the other upcoming Cursed City miniatures, feel free to hit the subscribe button. As I am very looking forward to seeing you again in my next video. Until then, take care.